The moment he called me obsolete, something inside me didn't break. It sharpened. That was the exact second I stopped being an employee and became a problem he would never be able to solve. My name is Claire Donovan, and for 10 years I built a company from nothing but messy ideas and sleepless nights into a machine that processed tens of thousands of transactions every second without blinking. I was the one who knew how every piece fit together, not because I studied it, but because I designed it. Every system, every fail-safe, every hidden workaround lived in my head like a second language. And on that Thursday afternoon, sitting in that overpriced conference room that smelled like cologne and bad decisions, I watched a man who had never written a line of production code decide he could replace me. The room was silent except for the hum of laptops and the faint buzz of tension building under everyone's skin. 12 of us sat around the long table, engineers and analysts who had given years of their lives to this place, all staring at Ethan Caldwell, the founder's son, pacing like he was auditioning for a leadership podcast. He talked about efficiency, about cutting excess, about speed, words he clearly loved even if he didn't fully understand them. I took a slow sip of my coffee, already cold, already bitter, and told him calmly that what he was proposing wasn't optimization, it was self-destruction. The system was stable. We had just completed a major update without downtime. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone builds it right. But he didn't want to hear that. Stability to him sounded like stagnation. He turned to me with that polished, empty smile and told me the company needed to evolve, that my work was outdated, that my role after everything I had built was now unnecessary. Unnecessary. The word didn't sting the way he expected. It settled into me like fuel. He told me security was waiting, told me to hand over my badge and my laptop. He wanted a scene. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted me to react, to argue, to give him a story he could repeat later about how he cleaned house and dragged the company into the future. Instead, I stood up slowly, calm enough to make him uncomfortable, and then my phone started vibrating. I almost ignored it. I never took calls during meetings, especially not like that. But something made me glance down. The name on the screen made my pulse shift just slightly. Daniel Reyes, VP of Engineering at a competitor that had been quietly eating into our market share for years. He had tried to recruit me before. I had always said no. Loyalty mattered to me back then, but loyalty doesn't survive disrespect. I answered the call and put it on speaker without breaking eye contact with Ethan. The room froze as Daniel's voice filled the silence, urgent and direct, asking if I was available, telling me he needed me immediately, offering terms that made it clear he wasn't negotiating. He was securing something valuable before someone else could. I didn't look away from Ethan as I told Daniel to send the offer. The shift in the room was instant. You could feel it like pressure dropping before a storm. Ethan's confidence flickered just for a second before his ego forced it back into place. He tried to laugh it off, called it a stunt, implied I had staged it. But everyone else in that room knew exactly what had just happened. They had just watched the person being labeled obsolete get recruited in real time by a company that actually understood her value. I closed my laptop, slid my badge across the table, and walked out without another word. No argument, no raised voice, no hesitation. Behind me, I left a system that depended on me in ways Ethan didn't even begin to understand, and I took the keys with me. Walking out of that building felt strange, like stepping out of a life I had spent a decade constructing piece by piece. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead, and I could feel eyes on me as I passed desks where people pretended to work while quietly processing what had just happened. News travels fast in tech companies, faster than any official announcement. By the time I reached the lobby, they all knew. Outside, the air was heavy and damp, the kind that sticks to your skin. I sat in my truck for a minute, letting the silence settle around me, letting the adrenaline drain just enough to think clearly. Then I opened the offer Daniel had sent. The numbers were higher than I expected. The title was higher than I had ever asked for. But what mattered most wasn't the compensation. It was the respect. Before I could even start the engine, there was a knock on my window. I looked up to see Thomas Caldwell, the founder, standing there under an umbrella, looking confused and slightly out of breath. He had no idea what had just happened inside his own company. When I told him his son had fired me, the color drained from his face. He tried to fix it immediately, offering to talk, to reverse the decision, to smooth it over like it was just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. I told him I had already accepted another offer. When I said the name of the company, he physically flinched. He understood exactly what that meant. Not just that I was leaving, but that I was taking everything I knew with me to their biggest competitor. He asked me to come back. I told him it was too late. Then I drove away. The first few days at my new company felt like stepping into a completely different world. The systems were cleaner, the communication sharper, and most importantly, people listened. When I spoke, they didn't interrupt or dismiss. They took notes. They asked questions. They built on ideas instead of trying to override them. But even as I started building something new, part of me kept watching the old system from a distance. I knew how it worked. I knew how long it could run without me, and I knew exactly when it would start to fail. It didn't take long. At first, it was small issues, latency creeping up, minor slowdowns, the kind of problems that look manageable if you don't understand what's underneath them. But I understood. I had designed the safeguards, the fallback mechanisms, the invisible structures that kept everything running smoothly, and I knew what would happen if someone started making changes without understanding those systems. By the end of the week, the cracks turned into fractures. They rebooted systems they shouldn't have touched. They scaled infrastructure without accounting for limits I had built in intentionally. They triggered a chain reaction that shut down critical services all at once, and then the entire platform went dark. I didn't need insider information to know what was happening. The signs were public: users complaining, drivers stuck, systems failing. It was all predictable, not because I wanted it to fail, but because I had warned them exactly how it would. The messages started coming in quietly. Former colleagues reaching out through side channels, asking questions they weren't supposed to ask, confirming problems they didn't fully understand. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because helping them would mean undoing the lesson that needed to be learned. You don't dismantle a system you don't understand, and you definitely don't fire the person who built it without a plan. By Monday, the company was in full crisis mode, and right on schedule, I received the legal email accusing me of withholding information, of sabotage, of somehow being responsible for the chaos they had created themselves. I read it once, calmly, and then replied with facts. Everything they needed was exactly where it had always been. The documentation existed. The systems were accessible. The tools were in place. The problem wasn't missing information. The problem was that no one left knew how to use it. I also made one thing very clear. If they wanted my help, it would come at a cost, a very high one. A day later, Thomas called me to meet. He looked exhausted, older than he had just days before. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a blank check across the table and told me to name my price to come back and fix everything. For a moment, I considered it, not for the money, for the control. But then I thought about the team I had just joined, the respect I had found, the future I was building, and I realized I didn't want my old job back. I wanted something else entirely. So I gave him terms. I would fix the system. I would get them operational again. But I wouldn't be their employee. I wouldn't even be their long-term solution. I would be the person they had to pay to survive. The number I gave him made him hesitate. The conditions made it worse. But he agreed because he didn't have a choice. That weekend, I went back into the building I had once called mine. It was empty, quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The energy was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was a broken system waiting to be rebuilt. I sat down at my old workstation and started from scratch. I didn't patch their mistakes. I erased them. Then I rebuilt the core systems the way they should have been maintained in the first place: clean, efficient, stable. It took nearly 2 days without real sleep, fueled by caffeine and focus. But by the end of it, the system was alive again, better than before. But this time, it wasn't theirs. Not really, because part of the agreement was ownership. They got access. I kept control. When I walked out of that building again, it felt different, final, like closing a chapter instead of being forced out of it. Months later, the company survived, but it never recovered its edge. It became stable, predictable, safe, the kind of company that follows instead of leads. Meanwhile, at my new job, we built something faster, smarter, and more advanced than anything I had created before. And this time, I wasn't fighting to be heard. I was leading. One afternoon, during a celebration meeting, my phone buzzed with another message from Thomas. They wanted more help, more optimization, more of my time. I didn't even open the full email. I forwarded it to legal and told them to handle it at my updated consulting rate. Then I put my phone down and raised a glass with my team, because at that point, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about leverage, and I had all of it.